The question hit me like a freight train as I stood there holding a box of photo albums, sweat dripping down my forehead in the August heat. Lourdes Martinez had just asked me something that would change both our lives forever. But let me back up and tell you how I ended up in that cramped Phoenix apartment, surrounded by decades of memories, and facing a woman who believed her best years were behind her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake Thompson, and 3 months ago, I was just another guy trying to make ends meet with my small moving company. Phoenix Movers wasn't exactly thriving. We had one beat-up truck, 2 employees including myself, and a reputation for being reliable, but nothing special. I'd been running the business for 5 years, ever since I got laid off from the construction company where I'd worked for a decade. The call came on a Tuesday morning. A woman with a soft voice and a slight accent asked if we could help her move from a 2-bedroom apartment to a small studio across town. Standard job, she said. Nothing too complicated. Her name was Lourdes Martinez, and she lived in one of those older apartment complexes near 32nd Street and Thomas Road. The kind where the paint peels a little and the parking lot has more cracks than smooth pavement. But the rent is manageable, for people just getting by. When I knocked on her door that Thursday morning, I expected to meet another client going through a typical downsizing situation. Maybe a divorce, maybe financial troubles, maybe just wanting something smaller and easier to maintain. What I didn't expect was to meet a woman whose eyes held so much life despite the resignation in her voice. Lourdes opened the door wearing faded jeans and a purple t-shirt with Roosevelt Elementary printed across the front. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had the kind of smile that reaches your eyes even when you're trying to hide your exhaustion. She looked like she could have been anywhere from 45 to 55. But there was something about the way she carried herself that spoke of someone who'd been carrying heavy loads for a long time. "You must be Jake," she said. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." As I walked into her apartment, I was struck by how lived in it felt. This wasn't just a place someone was staying temporarily. Every corner told a story. The kitchen had hand-painted ceramic canisters lined up perfectly on the counter. The living room walls were covered with children's artwork, crayon drawings of stick families, watercolor paintings of houses with purple smoke coming from chimneys, and certificates of achievement with names like Miguel, Sophia, and Carmen, written in careful teacher handwriting. "I taught 3rd grade for 22 years, Lourdes explained when she noticed me looking at the artwork. "These are from some of my students over the years. I couldn't bear to throw them away." The apartment felt like a museum of dedication. There were boxes of classroom supplies stacked neatly in one corner, construction paper, glue sticks, and those little scissors with rounded edges that only elementary school teachers seem to own by the hundreds. Bookshelves lined every available wall space, filled with picture books, teaching guides, and novels that looked like they'd been read multiple times. "Where are we moving all this to?" I asked, pulling out my notepad to start making an inventory. "Studio apartment about 15 minutes from here," she said quietly. "It's smaller, but it's what I can afford now." That's when I started picking up on the real story. Lourdes had been laid off from Roosevelt Elementary in May when the school district faced budget cuts. After more than 2 decades of teaching, she'd found herself without a job and without the pension she'd been counting on. The new apartment was half the size and in a neighborhood that wasn't quite as safe, but the rent was $400 less per month. "I've been applying everywhere," she told me as we started wrapping her dishes in newspaper. "But most schools want younger teachers, or they want someone with a master's degree in education technology. I know how to connect with kids and help them learn to read, but apparently that's not enough anymore." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she packed, but I could see the weight of the situation in her shoulders. This wasn't just a move, it was a retreat, a scaling back of dreams and expectations. "What about other schools? Private schools, maybe?" I suggested. She shook her head. "I've tried 12 schools in the past 2 months. 3 interviews, all rejection letters. They're very polite about it, but the message is clear. At 50, I'm not what they're looking for." We worked in companionable silence for a while, carefully wrapping her collection of snow globes from various school field trips and packing boxes of lesson plans she'd developed over the years. Each item seemed to represent a piece of her professional identity that was being packed away. I keep thinking I should just find something completely different, she said, taping up a box of holiday decorations she'd used in her classroom. Maybe retail or office work. Something to pay the bills until I can figure out what comes next. Is that what you want to do? I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted. For 22 years, I knew exactly who I was and what I was supposed to be doing. I was Mrs. Martinez, the teacher who made reading fun and helped kids who struggled. With math, I had purpose. Now I'm just a middle-aged woman who can't seem to get hired anywhere. The moving truck was small, but it took us 3 trips to get everything to her new place. The studio apartment was clean but cramped, with one window that looked out onto the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. It was the kind of place that was meant to be temporary, but I had the sinking feeling that Lourdes might be here longer than she wanted to admit. As we carried in the last load, she stood in the middle of the small space surrounded by boxes and looked completely overwhelmed. The apartment that had felt cozy and full of life now seemed to barely contain all the pieces of her previous existence. I don't even know where to put everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. Why don't I help you unpack? I don't have another job until tomorrow morning. For the next 4 hours, we worked to make the studio apartment feel like home. We hung the student artwork on every available wall space. We arranged her books on the built-in shelves. We set up her small kitchen table near the window and positioned her favorite reading chair where it would catch the afternoon light. As we worked, Lourdes began to open up more about her situation. She'd been supporting her elderly mother in addition to paying her own bills, which made the job loss even more devastating. Her mother lived in an assisted living facility that cost nearly $2,000 a month, and Lourdes had been supplementing the costs for the past 3 years. I could probably get by on unemployment and part-time work if it was just me, she explained, as we organized her teaching supplies into clear storage containers. But I can't let my mom suffer because I lost my job. She worked her whole life, cleaning office buildings so I could go to college and become a teacher. I can't abandon her now. The weight of responsibility was crushing her. But what struck me most was her determination to keep going, despite feeling completely lost. She wasn't asking for pity or making excuses. She was just trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been turned upside down through no fault of her own. By evening, the studio apartment actually looked like a place where someone could be happy. The walls covered in student artwork gave it warmth and personality. Her books and teaching materials were organized and accessible. Even in the smaller space, her essential items had found their proper places. It's not so bad, she said, looking around with something that might have been the beginning of acceptance. But then she sat down heavily in her reading chair and looked out the small window at the parking lot beyond. That's when she turned to me with tears starting to form in her eyes and asked the question that would haunt me for weeks. Jake, do you think I'm fooling myself? I'm 50 years old. Is it too late for a new beginning? I stood there holding an empty box, completely unprepared. For such a raw, honest moment, here was a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to educating children, who had touched hundreds of young lives, asking me if her life was essentially over. The vulnerability in her voice cut through me like a knife. I don't think age has anything to do with new beginnings, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. At 38, I'd felt old when I started my moving company after getting laid off. But 50? That felt different somehow. Easy to say when you're not staring down the barrel of being unemployed at my age, she replied, not unkindly. Every job application I fill out, I know they're going to see my graduation year and do the math. Every interview I walk into, I can see it in their faces. They're thinking, why would we hire her when we could get someone 20 years younger? For the same salary? I sat down on one of her unpacked boxes, realizing this conversation was far from over. Tell me about your best day teaching. She looked surprised by the question. My best day? Yeah. The day that made you remember why you became a teacher in the first place. A slow smile spread across her face, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely happy. It was about 3 years ago. I had this student, Marcus Williams, who couldn't read beyond a first-grade level even though he was in 3rd grade. Sweet kid. But he'd gotten so frustrated that he'd started acting out. Other teachers said he had behavioral problems, maybe needed special education placement. She got up and walked to one of her boxes, pulling out a folder filled with letters and drawings. I worked with Marcus every day after school for 6 months. We started with picture books, then moved to easy readers. I discovered he was actually brilliant. He just learned differently than most kids. By the end of the year, he was reading at grade level. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She handed me a crayon drawing of a woman with curly hair standing in front of a chalkboard. At the bottom, in careful third-grade handwriting, it said, "Mrs. Martinez is the best teacher ever because she never gave up on me." Marcus is in high school now, she continued. His mom sent me a photo of him last month holding up a report card with all A's and B's. He's talking about wanting to be an engineer. That's incredible, I said, and I meant it. How many Marcus Williams stories do you have? Dozens, she said quietly. Maybe hundreds. Kids who struggled with reading, or math, or just fitting in. Kids from broken homes who needed someone to believe in them. Kids who were too smart for their own good and getting into trouble because they were bored. And you think all of that experience, all of that skill, just disappears because you turned 50? She was quiet for a long moment. The school districts sure seemed to think so. That's when something clicked for me. What if you didn't need the school districts? What do you mean? I started pacing around her small apartment, an idea forming. You said you have dozens of success stories like Marcus. You said you know how to connect with kids who are struggling. What if there are parents out there right now dealing with the same problems, desperate for someone who actually knows how to help? You mean tutoring? I mean more than that. I mean becoming the teacher those kids need, even if it's not in a traditional classroom. She shook her head. Jake, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but tutoring doesn't pay enough to live on. I'd be lucky to make $15 an hour, and that's only if I could find enough students. Who says you have to charge $15 an hour? She looked at me like I was crazy. Because that's what tutors charge. What do parents pay for a good therapist? $60, $80, $100 an hour? What do they pay for specialized programs for kids with learning differences? Thousands of dollars. I could see her mind working, but she was still skeptical. That's different. Those are licensed professionals with degrees and certifications. You have a degree. You have 22 years of experience. You have a track record of success with kids who are struggling. Most importantly, you have something those expensive programs don't have. You actually care about the kids, not just the profit. She sat back down in her chair, staring at the drawing Marcus had made for her. Even if that were possible, I wouldn't know where to start. I don't know anything about running a business or marketing myself or any of that. But I do, I said, surprising myself again. I've been running my own business for 5 years. It's not huge, but I've learned a lot about finding customers and managing finances and all the practical stuff. The idea was growing bigger in my mind. What if we partnered up? You provide the educational expertise, I handle the business side. We create something that gives kids the kind of individual attention they need and gives parents real results. Jake, that's sweet of you to offer, but I'm not being sweet. I'm being practical. I sat down across from her. My moving business is barely breaking even. I'm good at what I do, but there's only so much growth potential in helping people move their stuff from one place to another. But education? Helping kids succeed? That's something people will invest in. She was quiet for several minutes, turning, Marcus's drawing over in her hands. I've thought about it before, she admitted, especially in the last few months. But starting over at 50, building something from nothing, it seems impossible. Everything seems impossible until someone does it. You said Marcus couldn't read at grade level, and that seemed impossible too. That's different. Is it? You saw potential in a kid that everyone else had given up on. You put in the work, you didn't quit when it got hard, and you changed his life. Why is believing in yourself any different than believing in him? She stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot. Because when I was working with Marcus, I knew what I was doing. I had a classroom, a curriculum, support from the school. This would be, I don't even know what this would be. It would be you doing what you do best, just in a different setting. But what if I fail? What if I can't find enough families who need help? What if I'm not good at this without the structure of a school system? What if you succeed? What if you build something that helps dozens of kids like Marcus? What if you create the kind of learning environment you always wished you could have in your classroom? She turned back to face me. You really think this could work? I think you're the kind of teacher parents pray they'll find for their struggling kids. I think you have skills that money can't buy and experience that can't be taught in graduate school. I think the only question is whether you're willing to bet on yourself. She picked up another drawing from her collection, this one showing a classroom full of smiling children with a teacher who had her arms spread wide, as if she was trying to hug them all at once. I've been so focused on what I lost that I forgot what I still have, she said quietly. Which is? Everything that made me a good teacher in the first place. The ability to see what each child needs. The patience to work with them at their own pace. The knowledge of how to make learning fun and engaging. She looked around her small apartment, but this time I could see her seeing it differently. Not as a step down from her previous life, but as a blank canvas for something new. If we were going to do this, she said slowly, how would we even begin? The next morning, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop on Camelback Road with a legal pad full of notes and a head spinning with possibilities. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind racing with ideas about how to turn Lords' teaching expertise into a real business. But in the cold light of day, I was starting to wonder if I'd gotten carried away with my own enthusiasm. My phone buzzed with a text from Lords. Jake, I've been thinking about our conversation. Can we meet today? I have some ideas. When she walked into the coffee shop an hour later, she looked different. Gone was the defeated woman from yesterday. She carried herself with purpose, and her eyes had a spark I hadn't seen before. In her hands was a thick folder and what looked like a business plan notebook. I couldn't sleep, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I kept thinking about what you said, about betting on myself. So I started making lists. She opened the folder and spread out several sheets of paper covered in her neat handwriting. I wrote down every child I've worked with who struggled in traditional classroom settings, but thrived with individual attention. I counted 47 kids over, the years who went from failing to succeeding once they got the right kind of help. I leaned forward, impressed by her thoroughness. 47 success stories. That's just the ones I can remember clearly. There were probably more. She pulled out another sheet. Then I started thinking about what those children had in common. Most of them weren't learning disabled or behind because they lacked intelligence. They just learned differently, or they had gaps in their foundation skills, or they needed someone to present information in a way that made sense to them. She was animated now, her hands moving as she explained her thinking. Traditional classrooms work great for about 70% of kids, but that leaves 30% who need something different. And those are the kids who often get labeled as problems or slow learners, when really, they just need a different approach. So our target market is that 30%. Exactly. But here's what I realized. Those parents are already spending money trying to help their kids. They're hiring tutors who charge $20 an hour and don't really understand learning differences. They're enrolling their kids in expensive learning centers that use one-size-fits-all programs. They're paying for testing and therapy and all kinds of interventions. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a website. I looked up Sylvan Learning Center prices this morning. They charge between $40 and $60 per hour, and that's for group sessions with standardized curricula. Huntington Learning Center is even more expensive. And you think you could compete with them? I think I could do better than them, she said firmly. Those places are businesses first, education second. They have quotas to meet and profits to generate. I would be focused entirely on what each individual child needs. She opened her notebook and showed me pages of detailed planning. I've been thinking about this all wrong. I was looking for someone to hire me to do what I've always done. But what if I hired myself to do what I do best? Walk me through your vision. Personalized learning plans for each child, based on detailed assessment of their strengths and challenges. One-on-one sessions in a comfortable environment, maybe here in my apartment, or in their homes, or at a neutral location like a library. Focus on building foundational skills while also working on confidence and love of learning. She flipped to another page. I would start with reading and math skills for elementary and middle school students. Those are my strongest areas, and they're the foundation for everything else. But eventually, I could expand to study skills, homework support, test preparation. What would you charge? That's where I need your business expertise, she admitted. I was thinking maybe $50 per hour to start? That's competitive with the learning centers, but still accessible for middle-class families. I did some quick math in my head. If you worked 20 hours per week at $50 an hour, that's $1,000 a week. $4,000 a month. That's more than you were making as a teacher. Her eyes widened. I hadn't calculated it that way. But would there really be demand for 20 hours a week? Let's find out. I pulled out my own phone and started searching. There are 6 elementary schools within a 10-mile radius of here. Each one probably has at least 50 kids who struggle with reading or math. Then there are the middle schools and private schools. But how would parents even know I exist? The learning centers have big marketing budgets and fancy websites. That's where old-fashioned word of mouth comes in, I said. One success story leads to another. One satisfied parent tells 3 friends. It's slower to build than advertising, but it's more sustainable. She nodded thoughtfully. I do still keep in touch with a lot of my former colleagues and parents from my classes over the years. Some of them might be willing to recommend me if their friends need help. Plus, you have something the big learning centers don't have. A track record with real names and faces. Marcus Williams isn't just a statistic in a corporate report. He's a real kid whose life you changed. We spent the next 2 hours working through the practical details. Lourdes would need to set up a simple business license and liability insurance. She'd need basic materials, workbooks, manipulatives, assessment tools. We talked about scheduling systems and payment processing and record keeping. This feels overwhelming, she said at one point. I know how to teach, but I don't know how to run a business. You don't have to learn everything at once. Start with one student. Figure out what works and what doesn't. Build from there. But how do I find that first student? I thought for a moment. What about posting flyers at the local libraries? Parents of struggling readers spend a lot of time there, looking for books that might motivate their kids. Or the pediatrician offices, she suggested. Doctors often get asked about learning problems. Coffee shops near schools, community centers, even grocery stores in family neighborhoods. She was writing down everything we discussed. What should the flyers say? Keep it simple. Something like, is your child struggling with reading or math? Experienced elementary teacher available for personalized tutoring. 22 years of classroom experience helping children succeed. Should I mention my credentials? My degree? Absolutely. But more importantly, mention your results. Proven. Track record of helping struggling students achieve grade-level skills and beyond. She looked up from her notes. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why are you helping me with this? I mean, you barely know me. You could have just finished the move yesterday and never thought about me again. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Honestly, I think it started because I recognized something in you that I felt when I lost my construction job. That feeling of being written off, of having people look at you and see someone whose best days are behind them. And maybe because I've never seen someone light up the way you did when you talked about Marcus and your other students. Most people spend their whole lives looking for work that matters to them the way teaching matters to you. She was quiet for a moment. What if this doesn't work out? What if I can't find enough students? Or I'm not good at the business side? Or I just fail completely? Then you'll know you tried, and you'll still have all the skills and experience. That made you a great teacher. Those don't disappear just because one business venture doesn't pan out. But failure at 50 feels different than failure at 30, does it? Or does success at 50 feel even sweeter because you know how hard it was to achieve? She closed her notebook and gathered up her papers. I want to do this. I'm scared, but I want to try. So what's the first step? I think I need to call Marcus Williams' mother. What if I'm giving these parents false hope? She continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. What if I can't really help their children the way I helped Marcus? What if I was just lucky back then? I sat down across from her, recognizing the familiar spiral of self-doubt that I'd experienced countless times in my own business. Tell me about Daniel's progress. He's doing well, but No buts. Tell me specifically what's changed since you started working with him. She reluctantly opened Daniel's file. His reading level has improved from beginning first grade to mid-second grade in 6 weeks. He can sound out multisyllabic words now. His comprehension scores went from 30% to 75%. That sounds like more than luck, to me. But what if he plateaus? What if the other kids don't progress as quickly? What if— Lord, stop. I leaned forward. You're doing what every successful person does when things start going well. You're sabotaging yourself with worst-case scenarios. She closed the file and rubbed her temples. I just can't shake the feeling that I'm in over my head. Good. She looked up, surprised. Good? If you weren't worried about doing right by these kids, I'd be concerned. The fact that you care this much about their success means you're exactly the kind of teacher they need. Before she could respond, her phone rang. It was Angela Williams. Mrs. Martinez? I hope it's not too late to call. I have wonderful news about Daniel, and I have a favor to ask. Lourdes put the phone on speaker. What's the news? Daniel's teacher called me today. She said his reading has improved so dramatically that she wants to know what we're doing at home. When I told her about you, she asked if I could give her your contact information. Lourdes and I exchanged glances. His teacher wants to contact me? More than that. She wants to refer other students to you. She said in 15 years of teaching, she's never seen such rapid improvement in a struggling reader. After Angela hung up, Lourdes sat in stunned silence. A teacher wants to refer students to me. Someone with 15 years of experience thinks, what I'm doing is working. Still think you're just lucky? The next morning, Lourdes received a call from Jennifer Morrison, Daniel's third-grade teacher at Sunset Elementary. The conversation would prove to be a turning point neither of us saw coming. Mrs. Martinez, I'll be direct with you, Jennifer said when Lourdes called her back. I have 6 students in my class who are struggling with reading at the same level. Daniel was when he started with you. Their parents are frustrated. The kids are falling further behind. And honestly, I don't have the time or resources to give them the individual attention they need. I understand the challenges, Lourdes replied, carefully. Classroom teachers are dealing with impossible expectations. I've heard about your background and your approach. Would you be willing to meet with me to discuss how we might work together? 2 days later, Lourdes and I sat in Jennifer's classroom after school hours, listening to a proposal that would change everything. What I'm suggesting isn't traditional, Jennifer began, but desperate times call for creative solutions. What if we created a formal partnership between your tutoring service and our school? I'm not sure I understand, Lourdes said. Parents are already paying for outside tutoring services that aren't working. What if the school could recommend your services as part of an intervention program? You could work with our most struggling students during after-school hours right here in the building. Would the district approve something like that? Jennifer smiled grimly. The district cares about test scores and graduation rates. If your methods help kids improve their reading levels, they're not going to ask too many questions about how it's happening. But what about liability issues? Certification requirements? You're a licensed teacher with 22 years of experience. As far as the district is concerned, you'd be providing supplemental educational services under my supervision. We'd structure it as a pilot program. I watched Lourdes process this information. How many students are we talking about? This year? Probably 15 to 20 kids who could really benefit from intensive one-on-one support. But if the program works, it could expand to other elementary schools in the district. That's more students than I could handle by myself. Which brings me to my second proposal, Jennifer continued. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I'm burning out on the standardized testing pressure and class size issues. But I love working with kids who need extra help. What if I joined your program? I could handle some of the students while continuing to teach part-time. Lourdes looked at me, clearly overwhelmed. Jennifer, this sounds amazing, but I don't know if I'm ready for something this big. Think about it, Jennifer said. You'd have access to school resources, a steady stream of students who need help, and the credibility that comes with district approval. Plus, you'd be helping kids who might not otherwise get the support they need. The drive back to Lourdes' apartment was quiet. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. This is crazy, right? She finally said. 6 weeks ago, I was unemployed and feeling worthless. Now a teacher wants me to partner with an entire school district. It's not crazy. It's recognition of your skills and the results you're producing. But what if I can't handle the responsibility? What if I let down all those kids? What if you don't? What if you create something that helps dozens of struggling readers every year? She pulled into her parking lot and turned off the engine. I need to think about this. That evening, Lourdes called Sarah Chen, her former colleague. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Sarah was immediately interested in both the partnership opportunity and the school district collaboration. Lourdes, this is exactly what I've been hoping for, Sarah said over speakerphone. A chance to work with kids who need intensive support, without all the bureaucratic nonsense that makes teaching so frustrating these days. But are we qualified to take on something this big? Between the two of us, we have 35 years of classroom experience. We've worked with hundreds of struggling students. We know what works and what doesn't. How much more qualified do we need to be? Over the next week, Lourdes, Sarah, and I worked out the details of their partnership. Sarah would handle math tutoring and work with older students, while Lourdes focused on reading intervention for elementary kids. They would split the revenue 60-40 initially, with Lourdes taking the larger share since she was the one who'd built the business from scratch. The school district partnership would start small. A pilot program with 8 students, meeting 3 times per week after school. If successful, they could expand to other schools and serve more children. I still can't believe this is happening, Lourdes said as we finalized the contracts. 2 months ago, I thought my teaching career was over. Your school teaching career was over, I corrected. Your real teaching career was just beginning. She looked at the business plan we'd developed. Projections for the first year showing potential revenue of over $80,000, serving 40 students, across multiple programs. Jake, what if we fail? What if the district decides this isn't working? What if the parents aren't satisfied? Then you'll have tried something meaningful. You'll have given kids opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise, and you'll still be the same person who helped Marcus Williams learn to read. But now there's so much more at stake. There's also so much more potential impact. Instead of helping one Marcus every few years, you could help dozens of kids every year. She nodded slowly. When you put it that way, how can I not try? The next morning, Lourdes called Jennifer Morrison to accept the partnership proposal. As she hung up the phone, she looked at me with a mixture of excitement and terror. I just committed to changing the lives of 8 children I've never met. No, I said. You just committed to doing what you've always done. Helping kids who need someone to believe in them. The only difference is now you're doing it on your own terms. 3 weeks into the school district pilot program, everything seemed to be going perfectly. Lourdes and Sarah had settled into a rhythm working with their 8 students at Sunset Elementary. The kids were showing measurable progress, parents were thrilled, and Jennifer Morrison was documenting everything for the district administrators. Then came the phone call that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. Mrs. Martinez, this is Dr. Patricia Hernandez from the district office. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding your after-school program at Sunset Elementary. Lourdes's face went pale as she hung up the phone. Jake, I think we're in trouble. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the district headquarters. Lourdes spent the weekend in a panic, convinced that somehow they'd violated regulations or stepped on the wrong toes. She barely slept, going over every interaction with students and parents, looking for something that might have triggered the investigation. What if they shut us down? She asked me for the 10th time as we drove to the meeting. What if I lose my teaching license? What if they think I'm running some kind of scam? Lourdes, take a breath. You haven't done anything wrong. You're helping kids learn to read. That's not a crime. Dr. Hernandez's office was intimidating. Diplomas and awards covering every wall, a massive desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. But when the woman herself walked in, she was nothing like what we'd expected. Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Dr. Hernandez was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair and warm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee? Am I in some kind of trouble? Lourdes asked directly. Dr. Hernandez laughed. Trouble? Mrs. Martinez, you may be the solution to one of our biggest problems. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several sheets of data. I've been reviewing the progress reports from your pilot program. In 3 weeks, your students have shown reading improvements that typically take an entire semester to achieve in traditional intervention programs. Lourdes relaxed slightly. The children have been working very hard. I'm sure they have. But I've also been getting calls from other principals in the district. Word is spreading about what you're doing at Sunset Elementary, and everyone wants to know how they can get similar results. I don't understand. Dr. Hernandez leaned forward. Mrs. Martinez, we have over 200 students across 12 elementary schools who are reading significantly below grade level. Our current intervention programs are, well, they're not working as well as we'd like. What are you proposing? I want to offer you a contract to expand your program district-wide. Full-time position, benefits, pension contribution. You'd be Director of Reading Intervention Services, overseeing specialized programs at multiple schools. The offer was staggering. $65,000 per year. Full benefits, and the opportunity to help hundreds of children. It was everything Lourdes had lost when she was laid off, plus the recognition and respect she'd always wanted as an educator. But there was a catch. You'd be working within our existing framework, Dr. Hernandez continued. Following district curriculum guidelines, using approved materials, documenting everything according to our protocols. What about my current students? My partnership with Sarah? My tutoring business? You'd have to discontinue any outside educational services. District policy prohibits employees from running competing businesses. The drive back to Lourdes' apartment was silent. The offer represented security, validation, and the chance to help more children than she'd ever imagined. But it also meant giving up the independence and flexibility that had made her program so effective. It's a good offer, I finally said. It's an amazing offer, she replied. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at it without hesitation. But now, she was quiet for several blocks. Now I know what it feels like to make decisions based on what's best for each individual child, not what's required by a curriculum guide. You could still help a lot of kids within the district system. Could I? Or would I be back to the same constraints that made me want to leave teaching in the first place? That evening, Lourdes called Sarah to discuss the offer. Sarah's response was immediate and emotional. Lourdes, you can't seriously be considering going back to the district. We've built something special here. We're actually changing lives. But think about how many more children we could help with district resources behind us. At what cost? Remember why you were laid off in the first place. Budget cuts, standardized testing pressure, one-size-fits-all approaches. Do you really think that's changed in 6 months? Sarah had a point. The district's interest in Lourdes' program was driven by her results, but their offer would require her to abandon the very methods that produced those results. Besides, Sarah continued, what happens to our current students if you take the district job? What happens to Daniel and the other kids who are finally succeeding? The next day, Lourdes asked Jennifer Morrison to meet for coffee. She needed perspective from someone who understood both sides of the equation. I've been expecting this conversation, Jennifer said when Lourdes explained the district's offer. I wondered how long it would take them to notice what you're doing. What would you do? Jennifer stirred her coffee thoughtfully. 5 years ago, I would have told you to take the district job without question. Security, benefits, professional validation. It seems like a no-brainer. And now? Now I've seen what happens when you give a gifted teacher the freedom to actually teach. Your students aren't just improving their reading scores, Lourdes. They're rediscovering their love of learning. Daniel told me yesterday that he wants to be a teacher when he grows up, just like you. But I could help so many more children with district backing. Could you? Or would you be helping the district meet its testing requirements while losing the personal connections that make your approach so effective? Jennifer leaned forward. I've been teaching in this district for 15 years. I've seen innovative programs come and go. They start with great intentions, but they always get bogged down in bureaucracy and budget constraints. Within 2 years, your reading intervention program would look exactly like every other district initiative, standardized, scripted, and soul-crushing. So, you think I should turn down the offer? I think you should ask yourself which option allows you to be the teacher you really want to be. That night, Lourdes sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, making 2 lists. On one side, she wrote all the advantages of the district position. On the other, she listed what she'd have to give up. The district job offered security and the chance to help more children. But it also meant returning to the system that had laid her off, giving up her business partnership with Sarah, and abandoning the personalized approach that had made her program successful. Her independent practice offered freedom, flexibility, and the ability to truly individualize instruction for each child. But it also meant ongoing uncertainty about income and the challenge of reaching children whose families couldn't afford private tutoring. "I keep coming back to the same question," she told me when I stopped by to check on her. "What would Marcus, Williams's mother, tell me to do? What do you think she'd say?" "She'd probably ask me which choice would help more kids like Marcus." "And what's your answer?" Lourdes looked at the photos on her wall, pictures from her years of classroom teaching, mixed with recent photos of her current students. "I think Marcus succeeded because someone took the time to really see him as an individual learner. The district job would give me access to more children, but it wouldn't give me the time or freedom to really see each one." "Sounds like you have your answer." "I do. But it's terrifying to turn down that kind of security." "What's more terrifying? Turning down a secure job or spending the rest of your career wondering what you could have accomplished if you'd trusted yourself?" She picked up her phone and started dialing Dr. Hernandez's number, then stopped. "Jake, what if I'm making a huge mistake?" "Then you'll make it on your own terms, doing work that matters to you." She nodded and finished dialing. "Dr. Hernandez? This is Lourdes Martinez. Thank you so much for the generous offer, but I'm going to have to decline." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Dr. Hernandez clearly hadn't expected a rejection. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm not sure I understand. Perhaps you need more time to consider the offer? I appreciate the confidence you've shown in my work, but I believe I can serve struggling readers more effectively through my current approach. But think about the resources we could provide, the number of children you could reach." "I have thought about it, and I've realized that sometimes reaching fewer children more effectively is better than reaching many children with diluted methods." After hanging up, Lourdes sat in her quiet apartment, second-guessing herself. She'd just turned down a six-figure salary and the kind of professional recognition she'd dreamed about for years. But looking around at her small learning space, surrounded by the personalized materials she'd created for each student, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades of traditional teaching: complete alignment between her values and her work. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Angela Williams knocked on Lourdes's door at 8 o'clock, holding a manila envelope and looking excited. "Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I have something to show you." Inside the envelope were photocopies of Daniel's latest school assessments. His reading comprehension had jumped from below basic to proficient. His math scores had improved dramatically. Most importantly, his teacher had written a note on his report card. "Daniel has become one of my most enthusiastic learners. Whatever you're doing at home is working beautifully." "But that's not why I'm here," Angela continued. "I'm here because I have a proposition for you." She pulled out a business card from her purse. "I work for Metro Community Foundation. We provide grants to educational initiatives that serve under-resourced families. I've been watching what you're doing with Daniel, and I think your program is exactly the kind of innovation we want to support." Lourdes stared at the business card. "I don't understand. What if I told you we could fund scholarships for low-income families to access your tutoring services? What if we could help you reach the children who need help the most, but whose families can't afford $60 an hour?" The conversation that followed would reshape everything Lourdes thought she knew about the potential of her business. Angela explained that the foundation had a specific interest in literacy programs that showed measurable results with struggling readers. They were particularly focused on serving families who fell through the cracks of traditional support systems. "We could start with a pilot program," Angela explained. 20 students from low-income families, full scholarships for 6 months of intensive reading support. If the results match what you've achieved with Daniel, we could expand the program significantly." "How would families be selected?" "We'd work with school counselors and social workers to identify children who are falling behind in reading, but whose families can't access private tutoring services. Kids like Daniel was bright, capable, but struggling with foundational skills." Lourdes felt her excitement building. This was the missing piece she hadn't even known she was looking for. A way to use her skills to serve the children who needed Help most, not just those whose families could afford it. There would be requirements, Angela continued. Detailed progress tracking, regular reporting, collaboration with school personnel. But you'd maintain complete autonomy over your teaching methods. When could this start? If you're interested, I could present the proposal to our board next month. Funding could be in place by January. After Angela left, Lords immediately called Sarah. You're not going to believe what just happened. Sarah's response was immediate enthusiasm mixed with practical concerns. Lords, this sounds incredible, but are we ready to handle that many additional students? We'd have to expand, hire additional teachers, find a larger space, develop more systematic approaches. That's a huge leap from where we are now. It is. But isn't this exactly why we started this journey? To help kids who need us most? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Lords and Sarah worked with Angela to develop a comprehensive proposal for the foundation board. They outlined their teaching philosophy, documented their success rates, and created detailed plans for serving 20 scholarship students. The proposal process forced them to articulate what made their approach different from traditional tutoring services. It wasn't just about smaller class sizes or individualized attention. It was about treating each child as a complete person, understanding their learning style, building their confidence alongside their skills. We're not just teaching reading, Lords explained during their practice presentation. We're teaching children that they're capable of learning, that struggling doesn't mean failing, and that everyone learns differently. And most importantly, Sarah added, we're showing them that someone believes in their potential. The foundation board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Phoenix. Lords had never been more nervous about a presentation in her life. These weren't fellow teachers or parents who already understood the importance of literacy. These were business leaders and philanthropists who dealt in numbers and outcomes. What if they ask questions I can't answer? She worried as we drove to the meeting. Then you'll figure out the answers. But Lords, remember, you're not asking them for charity. You're offering them a chance to invest in something that works. The boardroom was intimidating. 15 people in business suits sitting around a massive conference table. But when Lords began talking about Marcus and Daniel and the other children she'd helped, something shifted in the room. These weren't just statistics anymore. They were real kids with real stories. Reading isn't just an academic skill, she told the board. It's the foundation for everything else a child will learn. When we help a struggling reader succeed, we're not just improving test scores, we're changing the trajectory of a life. She shared before and after assessments, showed examples of student work, and played a video message from Daniel's parents, thanking her for believing in their son. By the time she finished, several board members were taking notes and asking detailed questions about implementation. The vote was unanimous. 20 full scholarships, renewable based on student progress. But the board went further than Angela had originally proposed. Mrs. Martinez, said the board chair, we're impressed not just with your results, but with your vision. We'd like to fund 40 scholarships, not 20. And we want to discuss the possibility of making this a 3-year commitment. Walking out of that boardroom, Lords was speechless. In 6 months, she'd gone from unemployment to running a thriving tutoring business to securing major foundation funding for a scholarship program. I can't believe this is real, she said as we drove back to her apartment. It's real, because you made it real. You saw a need, developed a solution, and proved it worked. But Jake, this is so much bigger than anything I imagined when we started. 40 scholarship students, plus our regular clients, plus the after-school program. We're talking about serving almost 100 children. Are you having second thoughts? She was quiet for several blocks. I'm terrified. 6 months ago, I was just trying to figure out how to pay rent. Now I'm responsible for changing the lives of children whose families are counting on me to make a difference. And I can't wait to get started. That evening, as we celebrated with takeout Chinese food in her small apartment, Lords pulled out the original drawing Marcus had made for her years ago. You know what I realized today? What? When Marcus drew this picture of me as his teacher, I thought it was about the past, about something I used to be. But maybe it was actually about the future, about who I was meant to become. She looked around her apartment, which would soon be too small for the program they were building. I'm 50 years old, and I think I'm just getting started. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of what used to be an abandoned retail space on McDowell Road, watching Lords direct the installation of new whiteboards and reading nooks. The 3,000-square-foot space would become the new home of Phoenix Learning Partners, the official name they'd chosen for what had started as a simple tutoring service in her studio apartment. "Jake, what do you think of the layout?" Sarah called, from across the room, where she was arranging math manipulatives in colorful bins. The transformation was remarkable. What had been an empty storefront now featured 6 individual learning stations, a small group meeting area, a parent consultation room, and a resource library stocked with books at every reading level. Soft lighting and comfortable furniture made it feel more like a cozy living room than a traditional classroom. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. "It feels exactly like what you envisioned." The foundation funding had allowed them to expand beyond their wildest dreams. They'd hired 3 additional teachers, all experienced educators who'd left traditional schools for various reasons. Maria Santos had been frustrated with rigid curriculum requirements. David Park wanted more flexibility to address individual learning differences. Rebecca Foster had been laid off in the same budget cuts that had affected Lords. "It's like we've created a haven for teachers who actually want to teach," Lords said, joining our conversation. "Everyone here chose to be here because they believe in what we're doing." The scholarship program was exceeding all expectations. Of the first 40 students they'd served, 38 had improved their reading levels by at least 1 full grade, equivalent within 4 months. More importantly, every child in the program had shown increased confidence and enthusiasm for learning. But success had brought unexpected challenges that none of them had anticipated. "We have a waiting list of over 60 families," Sarah mentioned, pulling out her scheduling tablet. "Between scholarship students and paying clients, we're booked solid through next spring." "That's a good problem to have," I said. "Is it, though?" Lords looked concerned. "Yesterday, a mother called me crying because her son has been on our waiting list for 3 months. She said he's starting to think he's stupid because he can't read like the other kids in his class." This was the dilemma they faced daily. Their success had created demand they couldn't meet, which meant turning away children who desperately needed help. "We could hire more teachers," David suggested, overhearing our conversation. "It's not just about hiring more people," Lords replied. "Finding teachers who share our philosophy and have the skills to work with struggling learners. That's not easy. Plus, we're already stretching our space to capacity," Maria added. "Where would we put more students?" As they discussed these challenges, I realized that Lords had evolved into something she'd never expected to become: a CEO. She was managing budgets, overseeing staff, making strategic decisions about growth and expansion. The uncertain woman, who'd asked if 50 was too late for a new beginning, had become a confident leader running an organization that employed 8 people and served nearly 100 children. "What if we franchise the model?" Rebecca suggested. "Train other educators to start similar programs in different parts of the city. Or partner with libraries and community centers to offer satellite programs," David added. Lords shook her head. "I keep coming back to the same concern. The moment we start trying to scale this too quickly, we risk losing what makes it special. Every child who walks through our doors gets individualized attention because we know them as individuals. If we expand too fast, we might end up being just another tutoring chain." "But how do we balance that with the need to serve more children?" Sarah asked. It was Maria who suggested the solution that would define their next phase of growth. "What if we focused on training other teachers rather than just hiring them? What if we became a resource for educators who want to learn our methods?" The idea sparked immediate interest. Instead of trying to serve every struggling reader in Phoenix directly, they could train teachers throughout the region to use their approaches. It would be a way to multiply their impact without sacrificing quality. "We could offer workshops for classroom teachers," Rebecca said, getting excited. "Show them how to identify learning differences and adapt their instruction accordingly." "And training programs for tutors and intervention specialists," David added. "There are probably hundreds of well-meaning people out there who want to help kids but don't know effective strategies." Lords was quiet for several minutes, processing the possibilities. It would mean becoming something different again. Not just a tutoring service, but a teacher training organization. "Are you ready for another reinvention?" I asked her. She laughed. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. I wanted stability and predictability. But now, I think I'm addicted to the challenge of figuring out how to help more kids learn. Over the next few weeks, they developed a comprehensive plan for what they called the Phoenix Learning Partners Institute. They would offer weekend workshops for teachers, intensive summer training programs, and ongoing mentorship for educators implementing their methods. The first workshop was scheduled for a Saturday morning in February. They'd advertise through teacher networks and education blogs, hoping for maybe 20 participants. Instead, 180 teachers signed up, forcing them to move the event to a school auditorium. "I think we struck a nerve," Sarah said as they watched teachers filing into the auditorium before the workshop began. "Look at their faces," Lords observed. "They look exactly like I felt a year ago. Frustrated, defeated, looking for something. That actually works." The workshop exceeded everyone's expectations. Teachers were hungry for practical strategies they could implement immediately. They took notes frantically, asked detailed questions, and stayed long after the official end. "Time to continue discussions. This isn't just about reading instruction," one participant told Lords during the break. "This is about remembering why I became a teacher in the first place." "I've been teaching for 12 years, said another. "And I learned more this morning than I did in my last 3 professional development sessions combined." But it was the comment from a young teacher that really hit home. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm only 26, but I was already thinking about leaving education because I felt like I wasn't making a difference. This gives me hope that I can actually help my struggling students." After the workshop, as they cleaned up materials and counted evaluation forms, Lords reflected on how far they'd come. "A year ago, I was asking you if 50 was too late for a new beginning. Now I'm helping other teachers find their new beginnings at every age." "What's next?" I asked. "I got a call yesterday from a superintendent in Tucson. She wants to bring our training program to her entire district, and there's interest from districts in Colorado and Nevada. You're going to be traveling a lot." "We're going to be traveling a lot," she corrected. "I can't do this alone, and I don't want to. Sarah, Maria, David, Rebecca, we're all part of this now." The ripple effect continued to expand. Teachers who attended their workshops went back to their classrooms with new strategies and renewed enthusiasm. Many of them started seeing dramatic improvements in their struggling readers. Word spread through educator networks. Requests for training programs poured in from across the Southwest. "Sometimes I feel like we're standing in the middle of a hurricane," Lords told me as we reviewed their schedule for the coming months. "But it's a good hurricane. A hurricane of teachers who want to be better at helping kids learn." "Any regrets about turning down the district job?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message she'd received that morning. It was from Daniel's mother. "Mrs. Martinez, Daniel made honor roll again this semester. He told me he wants to be a teacher when he grows up so he can help other kids the way you helped him." "Not a single regret," she said firmly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." 2 years after that moving day conversation that changed everything, I found myself sitting in the audience of the Arizona Education Excellence Awards ceremony, watching Lords walk across the stage to accept the Innovator of the Year award. The woman who had once asked if 50 was too late for a new beginning was now being recognized as one of the state's most influential educators. But the real measure of her impact wasn't in the crystal trophy or the standing ovation from a ballroom full of education professionals. It was in the numbers that had transformed her doubt into undeniable proof. Over 800 students directly served, while on 200 teachers trained, and reading improvement rates that had caught the attention of education researchers nationwide. "When I look back at where this journey started," Lord said from the podium, "I think about a question I asked a friend while sitting in my small apartment, surrounded by boxes from a life I thought was ending. I asked him if I was too old for a new beginning." She paused, scanning the audience until she found me. "What I know now is that age has nothing to do with our capacity to grow, to learn, or to make a difference. Sometimes, our greatest contributions come not despite our experiences, but because of them." The applause was thunderous, but I knew the real story wasn't happening on that stage. It was happening in classrooms across 3 states where teachers were using methods they'd learned from Phoenix Learning Partners. It was happening in the homes of families who'd found hope when their children finally discovered they could read. It was happening in the lives of educators who'd rediscovered their passion for teaching. After the ceremony, Lourdes, Sarah, and I drove to the original Phoenix Learning Partners location. Now one of 4 centers they operated across the metro area. The evening tutoring sessions were ending, and we watched as students packed up their materials and hugged their teachers goodbye. "Mrs. Martinez," called out a familiar voice. Marcus Williams, now a senior in high school, jogged across the parking lot toward us. At 18, he was tall and confident, wearing a Letterman jacket from his school's academic decathlon team. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I volunteer here twice a week," he said proudly. "I help the younger kids with reading. Kind of like paying it forward, you know?" He pulled out his phone and showed us a photo of his college acceptance letter. "Arizona State University, education major. I want to be a reading specialist just like you were for me." After Marcus left, the 3 of us sat in Lourdes' office, surrounded by thank you letters from families, photos of students, and certificates of achievement. The walls told the story of thousands of small victories that had added up to something extraordinary. "Do you remember what you were afraid of when we first talked about starting this?" I asked Lourdes. "Everything," she laughed. "I was afraid I was too old, too set in my ways, too damaged by the school system. I was afraid I'd fail and prove everyone right about my limitations. And now? Now I'm afraid we'll never be able to help all the children who need us. But it's a different kind of fear. The fear that comes from knowing how much good is possible, if we just keep pushing forward." Sarah pulled out her laptop and showed us the latest expansion proposal. "We've been invited to present our teacher training model at the National Reading Conference next month. They want us to consider developing a certification program that could be implemented nationwide. That would mean taking this far beyond Arizona," Lourdes said thoughtfully. "It would mean taking this everywhere it's needed," Sarah corrected. "Which is basically everywhere." The scope of what they were considering was staggering. A national certification program for reading intervention specialists. University partnerships to integrate their methods into teacher preparation programs. Online training modules that could reach educators in rural areas who couldn't attend in-person workshops. 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine having a job at 50, Lourdes reflected. Now I'm trying to figure out how to create a national movement. "What's the difference between then and now?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "Then, I was looking for someone to validate my worth and give me permission to matter. Now, I know my worth comes from the work itself, from the difference we make in children's lives. And the permission? I give myself permission now. Permission to try new things, to fail sometimes, to dream bigger than feels comfortable." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Rebecca Foster peeked her head in, followed by a young woman I didn't recognize. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who wants to meet you, Lourdes. This is Jennifer Chen, Sarah's daughter." Jennifer was in her early 20s, with the earnest enthusiasm of a recent college graduate. "Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me dropping by. My mom talks about you and this place constantly, and I finally had to see it for myself." "What do you think?" Lourdes asked. "I think it's exactly what I want to do with my life," Jennifer said without hesitation. "I just graduated with a degree in special education, but what you've built here is what I dreamed about when I decided to become a teacher." "Are you looking for a job?" Sarah asked her daughter with a smile. "Actually, I was hoping to propose a something. What if we created a college internship program? Partner with universities to give education majors hands-on experience with individualized instruction before they graduate." The idea sparked immediate interest. Most teacher preparation programs focused on classroom management and curriculum delivery, but provided little training in working with struggling learners or differentiating instruction. We could be preparing teachers who actually know how to reach every child, not just the ones who fit the standard mold, Lourdes said excitedly. And we could identify passionate educators early, before they get discouraged by the limitations of traditional systems, Sarah added. As we discussed the possibilities, I realized I was witnessing something remarkable. Jennifer represented the next generation of educators, young teachers who would enter the profession with skills and perspectives that had taken Lourdes decades to develop. The impact wouldn't just be additive, it would be exponential. "Mrs. Martinez," Jennifer said as the conversation wound down, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." My mom told me that you started this when you were 50, after losing your teaching job. Weren't you scared that it was too late to build something new? Lourdes smiled. Terrified. I thought my career was over, that I was too old to start fresh, that no one would take a chance on someone my age. What changed your mind? I met someone who helped me realize I was asking the wrong question. She glanced at me. Instead of asking if I was too old for a new beginning, I should have been asking what would happen if I never tried. And what would have happened? Hundreds of children would still be struggling to read. Dozens of teachers would still be feeling frustrated and ineffective, and I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what I could have accomplished if I'd been brave enough to bet on myself. After Jennifer left, promising to send her resume and a formal proposal for the internship program, the three of us locked up the center and walked to our cars. The Phoenix evening was warm and clear, with the city lights stretching out toward the mountains. Lourdes, I said as we reached her car. Do you remember that day I helped you move? When you asked if 50 was too late for a new beginning? How could I forget? It was the question that started everything. What would you tell someone who asked you that same question today? She leaned against her car, considering. I'd tell them that 50 isn't the end of anything. It's just the age when you finally have enough experience to know what really matters. I'd tell them that new beginnings aren't about age. They're about courage. And I'd tell them that the world needs what they have to offer, even if, especially if, they don't believe it themselves yet. As I drove home that night, I thought about the ripple effects of that one conversation 2 years ago. Lourdes's willingness to risk failure at 50 had created opportunities for hundreds of children to succeed. Her decision to trust her instincts had inspired other educators to rediscover their passion. Her courage to start over had proven that innovation and impact aren't limited by age or circumstances. But perhaps most importantly, her story had become proof that asking, "Is it too late?" is never the right question. The right question is, what if I try? 3 months later, I received a text message from Lourdes that made me smile. Jake, guess what? We just got approval for our first university partnership. Also, Daniel's little sister is starting with us next week. Not because she's struggling, but because she wants to get ahead. Oh, and I'm thinking about writing a book. Is 60 too old to become an author? I texted back immediately. The only way to find out is to start writing. Some stories end with resolution and closure. But Lourdes's story doesn't end. It just keeps expanding, creating new chapters with every child who learns to read, every teacher who rediscovers their purpose, and every person who realizes that it's never too late to ask what if, instead of what if not. Because sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest questions, asked at moments when we least expect our lives to change. Sometimes 50 isn't the end of one story. It's the beginning of the most important chapter yet to be written. And sometimes, helping someone move from one apartment to another moves both of your lives in directions you never imagined possible. That's the thing about new beginnings. They don't come with age restrictions or expiration dates. They come with the courage to believe that your next chapter might be your best chapter, no matter what page you're currently on. 2 years after asking if 50 was too late for a new beginning, Lourdes Martinez had become living proof that the answer is always, unequivocally, no. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.